Good. We're ready. So good morning, everybody, and welcome to our hot topic for the month of February. I think this is kind of the first month of the year because January went by fast, I will tell you. I'm Phil Brilliant. I am with Brilliant Environmental Services. I am also with Continuing Professional Education Services, a nonprofit organization that provides educational programs to licensed professionals throughout New Jersey. Somewhere in the Hollywood squares here, my partner George Berkowitz is on, so do thank him. And also with us is Julianne Masago, who is the executive director, and kind of makes sure that everything runs properly, and also helps us know what credits. And this is a non-credit course, but it is something that over the next hour you are going to hopefully learn a lot and hear a lot, because about what's going on this year in 2023 on the New Jersey legislative agenda. This is recorded. It will go up on our website in about 48 hours. You can view it, share it, and our website is CIANJ.com. And for all upcoming courses, check us out at CIANJ.com. With that said, this is a meeting format. I will ask that you do keep muted, and I'm quickly going to mute all of you. And hopefully I did that. And Tony, you can unmute yourself. And just so we have the opportunity, so that when we're going Q&A back and forth, there's no interference from the outside world. With that said, we want your questions. We want to hear from you, and we want you to interact. You can do that by putting questions in the chat, and Tony and myself will monitor that, as well as if you raise your hand, we can take you off of mute, and you can ask your question right to Mr. Russo himself. So with that said, I am going to introduce. And I'm very excited. I was like, Tony and I have a good time doing this. It looks like we're doing it once a year now, which works out real well for me. But Tony Russo is the president of Commerce and Industry Association of New Jersey. I did look up, Tony. So next month is 10 years at CIANJ.
Yes. Yep. Hard to believe.
Do you get a watch, a ring, or or is that when you leave? But, and also the CEO and publisher of Commerce Magazine, which if you don't get the magazine at your office or your house, send Tony an email. He'll make sure to get you on the distribution list. The content, whether it's environmental, health, finance, accounting, whatever it might be, you're learning about what's happening in New Jersey first, from CIANJ. I always like to say that Tony is a unique person in his position. Having a degree in mechanical engineering, we were talking about that before, from NJDEP. So he's not somebody who's just fell into a role and didn't understand and make his way up the ladder. He has been a consultant in this environmental industry. He has spent some time in DC. He's done a little bit of everything, but I always love, my favorite part of his resume, and I actually tried to look up something and I didn't find it, is a quote unquote graduate of Leadership of New Jersey. A program which I don't even know if it's still in existence.
It still exists. Yeah, it's called Lead New Jersey now.
Oh, it's Lead New Jersey. Okay.
Yeah.
And I would say that because of Tony's leadership in his organization, he is leading New Jersey in the current decade and century. So with that said, that's my introduction for Tony. And Tony, you can take it from here and we can go back and forth.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, Phil. And good morning to everybody and Happy New Year. I want to thank Phil, George, Jules for the opportunity to kind of speak to everybody again. But as a point of privilege, I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge Tracy Straka. When I think about my 10 years here, I mean, it's all due to Tracy. And I had met Tracy, it's got to be like 20 years ago when I worked at the Chemistry Council. So Tracy, thank you for your leadership and vision. And it's hard to believe, I mean, we'll be celebrating our 100th anniversary in about 5 years. And it's incredible to think that for the last 10 years I've been here. If you don't know much about CIANJ, we represent about 900 companies. What I like about my job is we represent all sectors. And I enjoy my day because I could talk to a banking executive, hospital executives, insurance, manufacturers, utility people, a lot of our environmental folks that are on the call today. So it's a good spread. And what that gives me is a good, unique perspective when I go to Trenton and I talk to legislators. It's always good to kind of share real stories because you read a lot, you see a lot, but when you talk to the businesswoman, businessman, and you hear what they're going through, I think it's important to always remember that at the end of the day, they're employers, they provide quality of life jobs, and that's important. So what we want to do today is kind of talk about the legislative agenda, right? Everybody starts, it's like a new school year. When, a new year starts, everybody's going to say, well, what's 2023 going to bring us? And I think it's important. And again, I'm not a registered Democrat or a registered Republican. I'm a proud unaffiliated voter. But I think it's important to vote. And this year, it's important to kind of start and set the stage with the fact that the Senate and the Assembly are up for election in November. Now, because it's a non-presidential year, and again, I looked at the numbers and I'm a political junkie, unfortunately, New Jersey has about 6 million voters, registered voters, but typically maybe 40% to 45% show up to vote. And it's incredible when I looked at the history of the votes, whether it's gubernatorial or non-gubernatorial, it's a drop off, right? So I guess the only message today, whether you vote either way, is to go in November and vote. What'll be interesting, and the reason why I kind of tee that up is because typically when the legislature comes back after the holidays, the focus in 3 weeks, the governor is going to deliver his budget address on February 28th. We all probably read that New Jersey's got a lot of cash, flush with money. Combine that with the fact that it's an election year. Members always ask me like, well, what do you think? Well, the fact that you have money, which is good. The fact that it's an election year, Ted, the legislature, and I have to qualify this because anything can happen in Trenton, but the legislature tends to be conservative in an election year, in terms of taxes, new regulations. Not that there won't be any, but I think it'll be tempered with the fact that, first of all, once you get through the end of June, the budget has to be signed by July 1st. They typically, and I say typically, take the summer off, but sporadically you'll see some committees meet. And then in the fall, they go out and try to win re-election. The other important thing too is when you think about just 2 years ago, and I've been doing this 23 years, and Phil knows, Tracy, but a lot of new faces in Trenton, a lot of new faces. And when you think about this coming November, we have a lot of seasoned candidates, both Republicans and Democrats, that have decided to not run for re-election. And why is that important? When you think about the work that you do on the environmental side, it's complicated, right? A lot of acronyms. It's now our mission, right, along with our EBC, which is the Environmental Business Council, and some of the other forums, and my colleagues with BIA, the State Chamber, and other groups, to kind of educate the incoming legislators on our environmental concerns and issues. And I'll start with one that really I spent a lot of time on last year that's gonna probably come back in some format, and that's the A901, the dirty dirt legislation. Very important, and kind of refresh everybody's memory. Now, this is going back before Superstorm Sandy. If you have a chance, you have to read the State Commission of Investigation report that came out around, I think it was 2017. And I was there in Trenton when the commissioners came and testified before Senator Smith's committee. And it was pretty compelling, the 3 or 4 cases that they brought up. One that sticks out in my mind is the one in Old Bridge, where I guess there was some sort of a landslide or mudslide, and a neighborhood needed to have the dirt brought back in. And there was a broker down in Ocean County that brokered dirt from Staten Island, came in with stuff that included debris and contaminated material. That was a red flag, right? Combine that with another case that they cite down in Burlington County. So the impetus was, hey, wait a minute, back in the 80s, the legislature, and Senator Lesniak was the father of it. The whole A901, right? That was the bill reference number, A901, right? And that they said when it came to solid waste and hazardous waste, the whole purpose was to try to, weed out organized crime. And I think the A901 license, and I've talked to members that have gone through it, it's a robust program. It's not just the DEP, but it's also the Department of Law and Public Safety. It's the state police. It's a very comprehensive, not an easy license to get. And I have to stress, it's a license to the company, not the individual. Fast forward, right? Legislation was signed for dirty dirt in 2019. Then the pandemic hit. Governor issues his executive order, shelves everything, says, wait a minute, all regulations, all requirements are pretty much stayed until the pandemic is over. In, I think, June of 2021, he lifts the emergency. The clock starts again. And then, or I should say, probably June of 2022. I'm sorry. Maybe I have the dates wrong, but the whole point is that the clock started again. So last October, and I'm talking about October of 2022 now, you had to get registrations. And so it's a two-prong impact with anybody that touches dirt or soil, is you needed to get a registration into the department, and then you needed to get the A901 application in. My emails, I was getting many emails, phone calls from members saying, again, we represent landscapers, we represent developers, and they were like, do we qualify? Do we need to get it in? So to the department's credit, I started working with Mark Peterson and his team. We got a couple of extensions to March of last year, and then Senator Smith, again, to his credit, I think the takeaway was, I think the department recognized and the legislature recognized and the governor that it didn't make a lot of sense to have people submit registrations and applications before the regulations came out, right? Because at that point, why would you, have a rule needed after everybody got their applications in? We're talking thousands of applications. So we were able to get, through a coalition, an extension. And so last July, the governor signed legislation that basically extended the requirements of the A901 to 30 days once the rule is finalized. And again, I want to thank Janine McGregor and her staff. I know Mike Hastry, Paul Baldoff, and also the site remediation folks. We actually, right before the holidays, we had a follow-up call with Janine and her team, just to get a sense of the A901 rules, what's going to happen, are things still going to be ironed out and fixed? And right now, and again, it's a moving target, but they're hoping to get a draft rule out by September of this year. Now, we're hoping, and Janine, said that she would keep the lines of communication open. We're hoping that some of the issues, and I'll talk about what the issues are, because I think the issues aren't going to go away, right? And I think depending on the details in the rule, it's still going to be hanging out there. Probably the biggest consternation, or that's caused a lot of consternation, I should say, with a lot of our members, is the whole definition of not just the owners, but now you're bringing in brokers, sales consultants, and that really expanded, the reach of the A901. But just think of it, not just because of soil, now it also impacted solid waste. And again, we have property managers that maybe call up a waste company. They're managing a piece of property and they call up waste. Well, they've become a broker and they would be subject to the A901. So I think depending on how the rule reads in September, if it comes out, I still think it needs to be addressed. And I'll give you an example. A lot of the folks on this call are licensed site remediation professionals. Pretty clear in the legislation that if you're an LSRP of record on a project, you are exempt from the A901. As soon as you do any kind of work as a non-LSRP, then the DEP is basically going to say that you've become a broker and that you need the A901. So think about the scenarios out there and think about the fact that now you got to make a decision, a business decision, right, with your company to say, well, do we want to just become LSRPs of record? Are we going to do any work where we're not going to be the LSRP of record? Understand that there could be an enforcement compliance issue if the department decides that on that project. And again, you can't look at the projects, but you can't predict every scenario. But what they're saying is, yeah, you have to talk to your attorney and you may have to apply for an A901. That's a big deal. And the reason why that's a big deal is, again, when you look at, and if you don't have experience with the A901 program, you're doing what's called a 10-year look back. Financial disclosures, bankruptcies, civil violations. Who are your partners? Who were your partners 10 years ago? How about your family members? Are they involved in the business? Spouses, children. I mean, it is very comprehensive, and you fill out these disclosures, both the personal and a business disclosure, and that gets submitted to the Department of Law and Public Safety, and then the state police start their investigation. They go out and they interview. Again, the intent is to weed out any kind of organized crime before the license is issued. Typically, a license, an A901 license, could take up 18 months, 2 years. The other thing that kind of surfaced, and I think, again, we have an event with the Attorney General on March 6th, and this is a question I want to tee up to him, but a lot of our members have what's called an ESOP, right? An employee stock ownership program, where maybe they give out a certain percentage of the business. And one member specifically that comes to mind, he's got 40 employees, maybe they get 1%, 2%. Well, the legislation doesn't distinguish when you have to identify key employees. you're going to have to list those employees. And the problem is, what happens when you list all 40 employees, you get your A901, an employee leaves, you have to amend your A901. So you could see that administratively, this complicates matters. And I think the legislation is kind of silent to what you do with an ESOP or an employee-owned program. So that becomes an issue. I think the other issue too is a certificate of public convenience and necessity. Now, about 3 or 4 months ago, I got a call out of the blue from one of my members that wanted to start applying for an A901. And, he said, Tony, I'm not even sure how to even approach the certificate of public convenience and necessity. And basically, if you look at the history of it, it was intended to say, again, think about solid waste, right? When the A901 program came out, is there a necessity? Is there a need from a public or community perspective that this license has to be issued? That's another issue that needs to be addressed. So I think there's a lot of issues, Phil, that with the A901 that quite frankly, we'll have to wait to see what the details are in the rule. But I think a lot of these issues are not going to go away. And I'll give you a couple other anecdotes. I was at an event talking about dirty dirt, and a landscaper excavator came up to me afterwards. I won't name the township. He literally dug out a pool, and now he had all this dirt. And he gets a local ordinance, I guess a local permit, but the township said you needed to sample the soil. Problem is, nobody really knew what they needed to sample for, right? So you could sample for hundreds, thousands of parameters. What do? And he actually is in court because at the end of the day, nobody could really clarify what to do. The other thing I'll talk about, and we should maybe take some questions on the A901 before we move on, but the other thing was the department, again, to their credit, tried to resolve this and say, look, we don't want to go after landscapers that maybe do some de minimis work. So they set some de minimis levels, thresholds, but then they also came out with what's called a certification. So you as the business can make a decision to say, if you're going to operate with what they call non-restricted soil, right? Soil that basically can go anywhere, it's not regulated, then you could sign the certification and say, I'm good. I don't need the A901. I'm certifying that I deal with non-restricted soil. The issue is, again, if you look at the certification, and again, I'm not an attorney, but a lot of attorneys and business owners have talked to me about this. You have to show proof, right? If you ever questioned, the department can come in and inspect. If the township calls the local board of health to say, okay, you signed this certification, but we just became aware of the fact that, at this address, there's contaminated soil. So you have to keep good records, right? So what does that mean? Right? What does that mean to that landscaper, to that excavator that maybe does a residential job, digs up the dirt, 3 years later, more dirt comes in, it's contaminated, right? The department does their job, the locals do their job. They come out and say, wait a minute, it's contaminated. And then what's going to happen? An investigation is triggered. So I guess the only qualifier for that certification, while it's good and you got to make that business decision, you just got to be ready that if you're ever inspected, that you have good paperwork with it. So I think these issues are going to be around. We'll see what happens when the rule comes out. The good news here is that, again, you don't have to apply for the A901 until 30 days after promulgation. What's not debatable is by July 14th of last year, if you do any kind of brokering, dirt hauling, transportation, collection, you needed to register with the department. So, that's clear cut. If you haven't, and, some people haven't, that's, again, a business decision that they have to make because you're really not supposed to be operating without that registration being submitted to the department. So, I don't know, Phil, if you want to take questions on A901 or do you want to?
Well, I'll definitely take questions, but I just want to, I know Tracy unmuted herself, but let me ask before I let her go, just to go back to what you were just talking about. That's a question I've been asked a couple of times. Say today you woke up or you started a new company and you realized you need to register. Are you saying that since you didn't get it in by July 14th of last year, you're out of luck?
No, there's actually language in there that says if you post July 14th and you start a new company, you could submit the registration. And I think what they're saying is if you existed before that, you should have gotten the registration in.
And if you by some chance are a company that needs to get an A901 when the rules come out and you didn't register, is that also going to disqualify you?
That could be an issue. Yep, that for
We
sure.
don't have an answer to that yet.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
Tracy, did you want to add something, Tracy?
I guess my only other comment or thought about this is figure out ahead of time, if you're applying, how to classify your employees to keep as many people from having to go through this process as possible. And start giving that thought right now, because the rule says if you're a manager, if you're a salesperson, you need to go through that background check. And if you're in the process, you know, if you're going to be involved with the dirt. So maybe you think about reclassifying roles and responsibilities to minimize the number of people in your organization that you have to put through this, because A, they're not equity partners, which is a huge change. And B, what happens if somebody fails? Do you have to fire them?
Right. You know what, Tracy, you bring up a good point, because the A901 is subjective in the sense that that investigator, he or she's going to look at your record, right? It's not clear, you know, what disqualifies you, one violation, one bankruptcy. It's not clear, right? So to your point, also, it's important to add that, you know, the application fee, and I could be off by a few dollars, but per key employee, it's $1,500, right? So, you know, do the math. If you got 40, that's a $40,000 plus, you know, application fee just to get the A901 license. And then you got annual obligations. Again, you have obligations that if things change, you need to amend it. So, you know, I hope that a lot of these issues can be clarified, you know, in the rule, but we won't know that until we see the details.
Why don't we, any questions on A901? We can always come back to it at the end, but we did have some other topics, you know, because believe it or not, in New Jersey, there is more than just A901, though I did learn, and maybe it's just to my, I guess I didn't really know that A901 was Assembly 901.
Yeah.
I just learned that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was always wondering what, I thought it had some more interesting behind the scenes to it, but no.
Yeah, and Senator Lesniak, he's since retired, but he
Right.
actually testified back in 2018, 2019. Again, he was the father of the whole A901 license. And again, it's good, right? In the sense that, you know, you don't want a few individuals that have, you know, crooked ways to tarnish the whole industry. But unfortunately, those incidents happened. They've been documented. They were investigated. Could it happen again? Certainly, right? But now the question is, for all the good actors out there, you know, all they keep asking me, Phil, is what do I need to do to comply? Yeah. Right. And again, when you look at the lift, you got to ask yourself, and the analogy I'll use is the view worth the climb, right? So, you know, if you're going to get the A901 license, I think you got to buckle up and just be ready that, you know, a lot of things you're going to have to disclose and people are going to be interviewed, right? And to Tracy's point, people could change. Oh. So that's why the definition, including brokers, sales consultants, really salespeople, it really was a game changer.
Mm-hmm.
One last really quick comment for those of you, if any of you haven't downloaded and taken a look at the company and the individual applications, read them and start compiling your data now if you think you're going to get caught in it, because 30 days is not going to be enough to complete that application.
No way. No way.
Yeah, I have to say, because again, I was there when the legislation was going through. Obviously, I'm a former DEP, so I got to give some credit to both the regulators and legislators, because the intent of legislation is always good, right? It's the implementation. It's the unintended consequences that you really can't predict. There's really not a lot of time during the legislative process to kind of flesh out all these issues. And a lot of times that's why they call cleanup bills, or they have bills that you go back and amend, just like, you know, again, to their credit, they amended it to say, yeah, that makes sense. Let's wait till the rule comes out, then you apply. And so at least we got some time to do that.
Unintended consequences, my favorite term.
Yeah.
Favorite terminology. Okay. We had in our list of things, and again, if you have questions on E901, you know, you can either populate in the chat or raise your hand and we'll get you up here. And we'll definitely circle back, but I'm going to go down your list, Tony. I think there's some things we can go through relatively quick. You know, the second one on your list was the plastics recycling, the extended producer responsibility. And also, I mean, you know, where are we on that? And what do you think we're going to see this year?
Yeah, you know, and just for everybody, if I had to say, what is the theme going to be? And again, Senator Smith leads the charge here on a lot of this. And then on the assembly side, you have Assemblyman Kennedy, I believe, is the chairman of that committee. But, you know, it's pretty clear in talking with the senator and listening to the hearings, he's focusing on recycling in New Jersey. Again, you know, think about the plastic bag ban, right? And again, there's issues still floating around there. What's going on with these reusable bags? I know we have members that are involved. So there's that issue, right? What is there going to be an amendment to the single-use plastic bag? Should we allow paper? And the thing is, the home delivery items, right, really was something that, kind of popped up, because if you have food delivered to your house, they have to put them in reusable bags. So theoretically, you could have 13 bags that now you have reusable. So the intent is, is there some amendment that can happen with that bag legislation to kind of assuage any of the impacts or make it better? And that's yet to be seen. The big one, and a lot of our members are subject to this, is what's called an extended producer responsibility bill, right? Again, focusing on anybody that produces, distributes, sells plastic packaging. The goal ultimately is to reduce plastics in the environment. This is such a comprehensive, complex bill that, again, the senator had 3 hearings on it so far, all for discussion only. He's heard from both sides. If you remember Judith Enck, who worked at EPA, she was the EPA regional administrator here in New York, Region 2. She's with a group called Beyond Plastics. She's leading the charge to try to get plastics out. On the flip side of that, we have many members that manufacture plastic packaging. So what this bill would do is, basically create what's called, public responsible, or I should say plastic recycling organizations, PROs. So the bill, if it went through, and again, it's, do I think it's going to go through this year? I don't know. I don't think so, only because it's complex and there's probably more amendments coming, but it would create what's called a PRO, up to 10 producer responsible or plastic recycling organizations, where the PROs would have to come up. If you're a producer, you have to come up with a stewardship plan. You have to prepare this plan. That plan has to include funding for the collection, disposal, education of plastic recycling. You have to develop this plan. I think by 2030, the goal would be to have recycled content in your plastic by, I think, reduce plastic by 25% by 2030. Very challenging goals, because I've been told that, the market is not there with plastic recycling. By the way, the governor signed about a year ago that plastic content recycling law, which basically says, look, if you're going to produce plastic, try to have a lot of what you're going to produce include recycled content. The issue, I think, is the market there, right? So, and that's the balance, right? Is, whether or not you could do it. The other thing too is that, and again, this is going to so fluid, but 5 million and under in revenue, you would be exempt. The other thing was, medical packaging would be exempt. So I think what's going to happen with this extended producer responsibility bill, and the senator probably wants to have more hearings on it, it's probably you're going to see a lot more amendments. But I guess the takeaway for everybody on the call is that if you have clients, if you're working on projects, or if you're a manufacturer of plastic, you ought to be paying attention to this. I know a lot of the national groups came in and testified. I think there are 4 states that actually have legislation that's similar to this. I think the big one right now is Washington State's got a 150-page bill. Senator Smith's bill is about 17, 18 pages. So I think, again, a big nut to crack, but I think he's going to try to tackle it this year. And again, under the theme of, how much plastic is recycled. I heard numbers in the hearing, like maybe only 8% of plastic is recycled. So a lot of it's showing up in landfills. How do we get it out? What's the right thing to do? How much money do you put up? I mean, these are all questions that have to be addressed.
I know they're talking also from being on a board of a nonprofit relative back to food banks and food distribution and stuff like that. So they're going to do some kind of reopening this year, because for the plastic bags and being able to use that for deliveries at food banks and Meals on Wheels programs and stuff like that. So something's going to happen. And as I told you the other day, I had the opportunity to teach a class the other day with some people from enforcement, and they told me that they have hired plastic cops at DEP who are going out to stores, restaurants, bars, and basically issuing penalties and fines for people who have plastic straws and plastic bags. So it is something on the DEP side that they are enforcing.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, Phil. And the other thing I should have mentioned, that this legislation, the first step would be the department has to do a statewide assessment of plastic and recycling. So I just think you're going to see a lot on recycling in general. I know food waste is out there. There was a bill that was heard in committee not too long ago. So yeah, if you're in the recycling business, you know, when you throw in the soil, the dirty dirt, when you throw in, you know, plastics, I mean, that's the theme for this year.
Yeah. So again, if you have questions, bring them up, throw them in the chat or raise your hand.
I actually think there was a
There
question,
was a
Phil.
question. Does the
Yeah.
EPR include industrial packaging? Is it only for consumer products? From Raina.
Yeah, that's a good question, Raina. And I want to say that came up in the hearing where, you know, people are trying to limit it to consumer and not commercial. That's still up in the air. You know, where that finally lands, I think that's going to be the debate. But again, I think that at least there's some sensitivity that medical packaging, you got to be careful that, and even food packaging, right? The Food Council testified, we work with them, you know, and what their point was, you got to make sure that the integrity of the plastic doesn't compromise the food, right? So a lot of science, a lot of technical issues around, you know, if you change the contour of the plastic, what impact is that going to have on either the medical or food products? And I think that's a fair thing to look at.
Make sure there's nothing else there. Okay. Okay. Also on your list, you have the energy master plan update, climate change. I mean, I always, somewhat kiddingly say, whatever is the #1 priority for the governor is what we're going to see at the DEP.
Yeah. And so I want to,
this is a huge priority for this.
yeah. And so let me kind of set the table in the sense that back in 2019, the governor comes out with an executive order. He comes out with an energy master plan, sets out 7 goals, right? It's look at transportation emissions, look at deploying renewable energy. Obviously, we've all read about the wind, solar, improve energy efficiency during peak demand, look at communities that are underserved, all the way to looking at the building sector, which I could talk about. There's been some bills. If you're going to develop a warehouse or new construction, you got to have it solar ready, which, by the way, we had a real estate session with some developers. And what they told me is the market's already there. I mean, they're already doing that, so, those kind of bills, I think, make a lot of sense. And then they want to expand the clean energy program. I think the issue and the issue is going to be, and again, this is a hot topic, is the decarbonization of, our manufacturing or our energy system. And that's a big nut to crack, right? Is there a role for natural gas? So what happened was, and this is where you probably read the news, that the governor, I'm going to use the word shelve, the energy master plan, because I think they appreciate that there's some issues here. The big one was, with boilers, right? So boilers would have had to have gone all electric. And I think between industry, business, the school districts, the expense of converting those boilers to electric is, pretty high. And I think there was a pause there to say, yeah, let's look at the impacts of the energy master plan on the economy. Now, people keep asking, when is the wind going to go into the grid? What does that mean to prices? Energy prices are a sensitivity to a lot of our members. I mean, that's always going to be there. And so we have to just wait and see what happens with a lot of these things. But you'll see bills here and there. And to your point, Phil, the energy master plan is not law. It's not a regulation. It's a guide, right? It's their plan, right? And then legislators and the DEP through their, the New Jersey Pact, which is protecting against climate threats, they can come out with regulations. You could see legislation on energy decarbonization. And I just think we all have to just be vigilant and look for it and provide input and comments. But it's something that, I think until we get a better sense of the costs, because I know BPU is sensitive to this, you may see a slowing down or a pause just to kind of get a sense of where we're all going with it.
I shouldn't take my gas range out this weekend and put an electric one in. I mean,
No.
I'm hearing that new construction projects in the future, you're not going to get gas ranges. I mean, all these different proposals they're talking about. I mean, when does the crazy end?
And I hate to say this, Phil, it's to be seen. I mean, it all depends on what happens.
Yeah.
But again, I think think about the complexities of the things we just talked about, right? And do you legislate them? Do you regulate them? I mean, what do you do? And I think there has to be that balance with cost, right? Everybody wants to improve the environment. I think if you talk to the natural gas folks, they're burning natural gas a lot cleaner. I could be wrong, but I don't think New Jersey has any coal-fired power plants left. So a lot of the energy that's coming into the grid, right, the PGM grid, how much of it is sustainable, how much of it is renewable, and we'll see what happens. But it's a big enough issue. Again, if you're a manufacturer, you're paying attention to it. If you're a developer, you're paying attention to it. Because to your point, if you're going to build a new warehouse, again, what they told me was, as far as solar ready, a lot of the market's already there. The market's already there.
So that's a good point to ask this question. So, New Jersey, usually, not usually, but sometimes we tend to legislate and regulate before we fully think things through, and that's where we end up in the A901 and other areas. You have everybody up for election this year. We talked about that in the beginning. Next year happens to be a presidential election year, and there are rumors that our governor may have some larger interests. And then you're going to go back into a gubernatorial election. How much at this point in time will New Jersey kind of, I'm going to use your psychological side here. How much will they go into a little freeze mode, and let's see how this year plays out politics next year? And are we going to still see an aggressive approach in New Jersey, or do we think we're going to see maybe let's slow down a little and let's think before we act?
Good question. And I want to say, historically, whether you're a Democrat or Republican in an election year, you're going to be more conservative, right, with anything that's controversial, both because you don't know the cost impacts, you don't know the political impacts, but also that, again, they have to run for re-election. So again, the time that they spend in Trenton, that window's been condensed or shut. And so again, looking at the history, you tend to see a slowing down of the controversial bills. But again, I have to say, Trenton, anything can happen. And so you just have to be ready for it. Well, good segue, maybe good segue into PFAS, which is a big hot topic.
Anything can happen.
Yeah, anything can happen. So there's about 5 or 6 bills floating out there. And again, I've seen this throughout my career where, the DEP working with EPA, working with science data, they're going down this path of regulation, right? We all know the department's been on a mission to collect PFAS data, both in water, now in soil. They're developing standards, and a lot of times the legislature sometimes likes to get in and drop some bills. So there's about 5 bills. I think the one that is probably the one that surfaces to the top is what's called the Forever Chemicals Bill, where it's Senator Greenstein bill, where they're basically saying, look, if you have any products that contain these PFASs, and there could be 12,000 PFASs, right? It's you have to notify the department, and again, if this legislation goes through, notify the department, and the whole intent is to try to phase out and not utilize PFAS in your products. Again, the good news, and this is a blanket statement, the market is almost there, in the sense that in talking to some of the producers, the manufacturers, they're looking at that. So if they could replace the PFASs, they will. But again, it's one bill that's out there, some other bills that compel the Drinking Water Quality Institute to develop standards. There's another bill that if you're a water company and you have PFAS in your samples, you have to notify your customers. So, these are bills that are being heard or were heard right before the holidays, probably going to come back at some point. And it's just something that we got to keep on our radar and monitor.
On the remediation side, we're seeing more emerging contaminants every month. The department's giving it standards, the sample criteria. There's, probably there's a thought out there that you'll never again, close a case without a permit or some kind of, sampling for the future. So, even if it's, they start eliminating it in the industry, the remediation aspect of it is here for decades.
Yeah, that's a good question, Phil, in terms of the impact on cleanups with PFAS, right? And this is very fluid. But on February 23rd, if I could put in a plug for our event, we're going to have a conversation with both Walter Mugden from EPA, David Hames is on the agenda, but also we have a couple of experts that are going to talk about what is the impact. Now, the focus is going to be Superfunds, but what is the focus now if now you have a Superfund case where you have to now account for PFAS, right? So this is a classic example where, it's in the news, it's detected, it's out there. What do you do? How do you regulate it? Do you, write out prohibit it, right? Where there's bills that do that. And if you remember, and I'm trying to think, I'm going to draw a blank of like 18 years ago, in the plastic containers, there was a ban on, I want to say it was maybe bisphenol A. I could be wrong, But, it's similar to what we saw back then, where you see that the manufacturers start taking it out. So we'll see. But the fact is, there are a handful of bills regarding PFAS.
Let me just keep monitoring things going on here. Are new, more rigorous manufacturer reporting requirements potentially pushing more industry out of New Jersey? What a great question, Bob. What are you hearing from your members, Tony?
So, Bob, good question. And all I could tell you is that business decisions are like a salad. There's not one ingredient that's going to make or break that salad. They look at it in its entirety, right? Do I think that regulations have a factor or are a factor? 100%. I've talked to folks that are thinking about expanding, or they look at the regulatory climate, they look at the tax climate, they look at property taxes, they look at CBT, they look at transportation, infrastructure, and then they make an informed decision. So, it's hard to say if that alone is forcing companies out, because they factor in so many different factors when they make that decision and stuff. But yeah, what we're always, for is responsible regulation that doesn't, again, if you think about, and I hear this all the time, the administrative requirements to comply with all these rules and regulations and laws sometimes can be overwhelming to a small business, right? Because think about, you've all seen that, people are doing more with less. They can't retain their employees. I've talked to people where they're wearing multiple hats now, right? So they're doing compliance. Do they have to outsource that administrative burden? So our ask is, if you're going to regulate something, just make sure that the administrative requirements, are reasonable to the small business man or woman, that they can actually comply without having to spend a lot of money on it. So, but good question. I don't know if I answered it, but it's a factor.
What was that? What is like salad? Go back to that. What was that?
It's like a decision salad, right? You get different ingredients,
I gotta write that one down. I like that one. I like that. So we wrote down here, electric vehicle battery legislation.
Yeah, good. And I think this is one that everybody should put on their radars, right? Because everybody is all about electrification. Again, there's a bill, and in the bill, I guess whoever did the due diligence says basically New Jersey has about 100,000 EVs, electric vehicles out there. We've all heard in New York, the EVs, I should say the lithium batteries, catch fire. So again, Senator Smith had some legislation right before the new year that basically said, just like, the plastic side, you have to put together a management plan on how to dispose of these lithium batteries, right? So think about that. You're talking about an emergent issue. I mean, that's an issue that you're definitely going to see this year in my mind is, what you do with these lithium batteries and who recycles them. Surprisingly, again, I go back to the term, the market is going to drive this. Surprisingly, I've talked to some members that are already ahead of the game. Maybe they were into e-waste recycling before. They see a potential market here. They're starting to do some, investigations. They're starting to do some trial runs, the economic case to recycle and reuse these lithium batteries. So I think you'll see the legislation, but you'll also see the market kind of going there too. But it's a big deal. I mean, it's going to be around for a while.
Yeah. I mean, and I hate asking a question I don't know the answer to. I mean, has they ever solved the solar panel disposal market? I mean,
I think that's hanging out there because there was a commission that was created, and so everybody knows, because again, some members are impacted. I've actually been working on that, Phil, where I think EPA needs to weigh in, because solar panels, I think, and I could get this wrong and I forget because it's been a while, like not deemed universal waste.
Yeah.
So right now you can't recycle, you have to landfill these panels.
Right.
And again, I was talking to one member who's looking at a technology where he applies heat and all the glass and the aluminum comes off, all the metals are collected and then they get disposed of as hazardous waste. And then that glass and the aluminum get recycled, which again, I'm happy when the market drives, a lot of this too, because again, they see that there's a need and the markets are going to fill it.
Yeah. And that's been years and years in the works. So
yeah, I think the governor signed the creation of that commission to look at it. I want to say it was 2018, 2019. And I know I have to check back in, see where the department is, but EPA has to weigh in on it.
So let's get under the weeds, under the water. So the next one on our list is flood hazard rules. I know we spent a little over an hour last month on this at a hot topic. And
okay.
Yeah, the only thing I got out of it is, better hope your house doesn't get destroyed again. If you live on the Jersey Shore, because you're never going to rebuild it.
Right. And I'm sure a lot of people know that, the comment period closed last Friday. I know, I worked with the builders, I worked with, BIA, they all submitted some comments. The issue really is what's going to happen with these cases, projects that are in the queue. Are they going to be grandfathered? I think the important thing, going back to the legislature, and again, depending on your perspective, when you buy your house or you close on a sale, is the seller compelled to tell you that they're in a floodplain? My first point would be, do they know they're in a floodplain? Right. And the floodplains change a lot. And we learned from Ida that the areas that didn't get flooded got flooded. Right. So again, it's a moving target, but I think it's a fair point when you see legislation that says maybe as part of a real estate closing, you should disclose whether or not you're in a floodplain, because you're going to want to know that. Right. And I think these rules are going to try to address it. It is an issue. Unfortunately, 34 people lost their lives in Ida. I was driving on the Garden State Parkway. The Garden State Parkway was flooded and closed down, during Ida. I mean, that's why, I think when you look at the rainfall, precipitation, I mean, it's just, again, very fluid, but I think it's a rule that, people just have to be cognizant of when you're out doing projects. Are you in a floodplain?
Well, it's really also when you're proposing projects.
Yeah.
Looking at you're looking at a vacant lot somewhere, you basically got to determine is, where's my first floor going to be? And if it's, if you're thinking, 5 feet, maybe you need to think 7 to 10 feet. So, I mean, because you don't know what's going to end up in the final rules.
Right.
And are you going to be grandfathered? There was a new term floated out there. I can't think of it. It's not grandfathered. I can't think of what that term is, but you get it. I mean, you take one side where people may say it's going to have a crippling effect on development and redevelopment, because a lot of, brownfield projects and, floodplains and things like that, it all comes into play. And, so what happens? There's not a lot of green space in New Jersey that can be developed. So
no,
there's a lot to be, this kind of touches every aspect of development.
It does. It does. And that's why when you look at it as a whole, right, everything that's going on, we didn't talk about environmental justice. That's still hanging out there. The rules aren't finalized yet. I was actually on a call with a member yesterday that's concerned that, is his Title V permit ever going to get renewed? Look, Phil, I'm always the optimist here, right? I know there's always going to be situations.
I've noticed that. Yeah.
There's always, you got to work through these issues, right? And I think, with the department, the legislature, that's why associations exist. That's why coalitions exist, to try to fix it. We got to it's incumbent upon us to state our case. And what is the reason why you need a fix? Right. So I think we have to wait to see how these rules play out. And again, I mentioned this early on, and I learned this 20 years ago. Many of you probably remember Hal Bozarth, my boss at the time, well respected in Trent. And he's like, Tony, that's why God made amendments to legislation. Right. You don't have to, just because something goes into law doesn't mean you can't go amend it if there's a need out there. And I think that's important. Right. And so, it's, again, Phil, it's incumbent to hear the stories, because a lot of us folks in Trenton, we're not on the front line. We need to hear the stories. And I tell people, keep the ask simple, right? Keep the ask simple if you're going to fix something, or else it just gets anchored down and nothing happens. And I should have probably stated too, and this is remarkable, in a 2-year legislative cycle, more than 10,000 bills get introduced, 10,000, of which people think a lot of laws get passed. Maybe 500 get signed into law, maybe. So a lot of stuff works its way through the process, that resets, it changes, it's amended. And that's the art of lobbying. That's the art of advocacy. And that's what a lot of us folks do is, and again, to legislators' credits, both Democrats, Republicans, I was talking to one new assemblywoman, and she's been in for a year. And I said, Assemblywoman, how's it going? And I said, I have to give you credit because you're brand new, and I'm sure you get hit from all sides with these issues. And she's like, yeah, Tony, I hear from all the stakeholders. The issue is then I got to filter it all out and make a decision, right, on how I'm going to want to vote. And that's fair, right? You got to, and that's the whole art of, trying to get the right information in quickly and kind of convince them that, your amendment is the right amendment. And I think with a lot of these issues with flood and environmental justice, again, the intent is always good, but what's the consequence? Do I think they're going to not renew a Title V permit? I would hope not. I would hope that they understand that that manufacturer is there, provides jobs, and the department's going to work with us, but we don't know, right, until we see the final rule.
And for those of you who might be 48 and older and remember the bill bouncing down the road and becoming a law, what was that, Constitution
Yeah.
I can't think of the name of the show, or
Must Be a Bill, right?
Must Be a Bill, yeah.
ABC. Yeah.
and some of them just dropped off and didn't make it all the way down to become a law. So
Good analogy.
yeah, and I had that picture in my head. I just can't think of the name of the Saturday morning cartoon. But you touched.
I'm Just a Bill. I think it's called I'm Just a
I'm
Bill.
Just a Bill. Is that what it is?
And,
Okay.
I'm here on Capitol Hill.
You're on Capitol. There you go. Yes.
Yeah.
See, you remember those songs better than I do. That's because you're an optimist.
That's how sad I am. Yeah.
Yeah. What's that?
That's how sad my life is. Yeah. I remember that song.
Environmental justice. You touched a little bit upon it. We're sitting back waiting to see what the department does with all the comments that they received and the stakeholder process. I mean, and this was a high priority for the governor, a high priority for the commissioner. Schoolhouse Rock. Thank you, Steve. And so, I mean, is it imminent? Is it something we're going to see? We're moving almost quickly through the first quarter of 2023. What's your gut?
Yeah, it's a good question, Phil. I want to say, yeah, because it's been about 4 or 5 months that they've looking at the comments. I would expect it to go final this year.
And I mean, from, there's a lot going on in the commissioner's office. There's a lot in the deputy commissioner and chief of staff and things like that. But the priorities all seem to be clearly laid out. And, I'll ask you a question that we didn't talk about. I mean, what tends to be the logjam up there? Because it's yeah. And then there's a slow lull, and we don't see it as quick as we used to, or we thought we would see things coming out.
I would think it's a combination of lack of resources maybe at the department, a lot of new people there, right? We all talk about the brain trust, that experience that's been lost. I think that's a factor, but I also think it's the complexities of these issues. I mean, look, I talked to a lot of DEP people that say the legislature, does their job, and then they say, oh, the DEP is going to do that. So it's almost like a layer cake, right? They keep adding things to the layer. Yeah, you got to make sure that you could, provide resources so they can do it. But also, I think it's important, I know this was attempted years ago, that every regulation needs to be looked at, right? We need to, I don't want to say a sunset, but maybe a look back and say, did we accomplish the legislative intent? Think about everything that's been out there. That doesn't happen, again, because there's no resources, but that would be a great exercise to say, was the legislative intent on that specific regulation, that it accomplished its goal? And I use the A901, right? Now we got to wait, but did that accomplish its goal? Yeah. Are you still seeing stuff showing up from unlicensed brokers? That could happen, right? Because here's the problem, Phil, and this is what's been told to me, the scrupulous people out there, or they're just not going to apply for the license. They're going to keep doing what they're going to do. And hopefully they don't get caught. Right. So I think that's the balance, really. It's just unfortunate. But
I'm going to say something that, if anybody was at the board meeting on Monday night for the LSRP, it was said, but, long story short, it takes anything that leaves DEP and goes to the governor's office, given a minimum of 5 months. Okay. Yeah. And so, we're working on the board rules right now. We're going through the comments and everything. We have a sunset of November. If we don't get it done by November, we got to pre-propose, and so November is the 11th month. So we got to be done by the 6th month, but we got to go through the commissioner's office. So anything in the commissioner's office right now that hasn't left to go to the governor's office is still 5 months out. So it's a slow and grinding process.
For sure. Because again, these issues are complicated, right? You think about it.
Well, yeah, and you're sending it to the governor's office, and I know they're all very well, knowledged relative to recycling and environmental justice and climate change. That's all they do all day. So,
well, look, it's pretty clear to me, and I know the commissioner knows this and the staff knows that DEP touches every part of our lives, right? Every business, air, water, waste, recycling, right? Think of parks, so it's an agency that has that nexus to business. It's always going to be there. I mean, a lot of these issues will never go away. But you just hope that you could do it in a way that you could strike that balance of, protecting the environment and strengthening the economy, which again, I know I probably sound too optimistic today, but you just got to keep working the issue.
You must have slept at Holiday Inn Express last night or something.
Yes.
That must be it.
Coffee.
Oh, coffee. So, it was the last one on our list, we're getting close to our hour, but independent professional judgment. I have to commend you. I think you have done a yeoman's job of taking this from what started out as a, excuse the phrase, bitch session, yelling, we need to do something, the department is not respecting LSRP's independent professional judgment, and narrowing it down, having the department listen to you, getting a session on February 23rd, I think it is, or 2nd, I can't remember the date.
22nd, yeah.
22nd, getting a white paper out. I mean, what is your, again, you're not an LSRP, you hear from all of them. The Environmental Business Council is a great forum. What are you thinking right now? Where are we and where do you think we get? Because again, I will tell you, I'm not the optimist here.
Okay. And I want to give credit to your colleague, George Berkowitz, because I know, George, and it's good to see you. Here's the issue with IPJ, right? It's not black and white, right? It's nebulous, right? It's what is the ask, right? And then you got to hope that, and I think it's going to be a good first step. I know all the business groups kind of coalesced around each other. We sent in our white paper. If anybody on a call wants to see it, I could send it to them. I think, again, that's a evergreen document. It's going to keep changing, right? Depending on the first listening session at DEP. I keep going back to Phil, what is our ask? And is it something that's tangible where the department can make that change and we could measure it, we could feel it, taste it? Then I think we've accomplished something. But because I understand, right? I mean, since the SARA came around, 2009, the program's been working out well, but then there's that perceived, or maybe it's real, and I'm sure it is in a lot of cases, that clawback, right? That clawback, that was never the intent, right? You have these licensed professionals, you got to trust him or her that they're making the right decisions on protecting the health check boxes. So I think the IPJ, more than any other thing that I've worked on, like dirty dirt aside, it's going to be tough because it's very, how do you point your finger on, when it's not working well, or the department's clawing back. And that's, I think, the give and take with the DEP. But at least a conversation. Let's start that conversation. Let's have that discussion. Let's put the issues on the table. Let David Hames and his people have a crack at it, right? And then you keep working it. And hopefully we can come out of there with some sense of change and because at the end of the day, the goal is trust the LSRP. And expedite these cleanups because there is an economic impact here, right? If there's time delays, if there's uncertainty, here's what I tell people all the time. And again, I was talking to a banker yesterday, right? Now, this is non-environmental. He said to me, Tony, when there's uncertainty in the market, guess what happens? People hold their money. They don't spend the money, right? So if they're not sure they're going to get through a cleanup fast enough, what it's going to cost, they're not going to do the project. Right? Because it doesn't make good business sense to start, do I take out a bank loan and go in and start a remediation that might take me 5 years and then I end up spending more? So that's a fair point, right? And the department needs to appreciate the economics of this with IPJ, that it's a real factor when it comes to the economy.
Yeah. And actually you just said something, when SARA, Site Remediation Reform Act, turned 10, we all celebrated and everything like that. We're now 14 years later, come May. One thing we never did that as far as I remember, is evaluate. Maybe that's something that needs to be looked at in addition to where we are. There's more than just independent professional judgment. Where is the program?
Yeah. What worked?
Yeah.
What's working, what's not working.
Right.
Yeah.
Every time we go to SRAG events, put on the Site Remediation Advisory Group, we see all these metrics and stats and, we have numbers out the wazoo, but is it working? Is it, from the profession, the LSRP, the department, and the PRCR? And it might be something to think about for the future. Let's get through one step at a time. But, I don't think we've ever evaluated what the program's success is, if it is a success. And
you got to go to the rooftop for that, right? You can't be on the ground evaluating. You got to go to the rooftop.
Got to go to the rooftop.
Look at it holistically.
Yeah. So a couple of other questions. And as we wrap up here, Steve Sweeney, is he running for state senate?
State senate? No, I think if he's going to run, he's going to run for governor.
Governor.
I don't know if he'll go back to senate president, but again, I haven't talked to him, so it's just speculation at this point. But
Thought it was an interesting question.
Yeah.
To see what's out there. And I think you as an organization, representing an organization, has shown that if you get involved, people listen. Okay.
Yeah.
I think you're seeing now, and I'll use a local example in Toms River, where the locals, the municipality, the county, and others are not happy with something the department has proposed for an NRD settlement at Ciba-Geigy and at the Ciba-Geigy property, and they've kind of, you know, I don't want to say stop the process, but they're getting the department to hear, and there's going to be a public session next month. You know, in closing, you know, talk about how do you get the department and what's the best approach from the grassroots side to the organization side to get the department to listen to the people that they regulate and that basically works with them. I mean, you know, from your organizational point, how do you, you know, you're a respected person, it's a respected organization, you're a complete optimist, which I appreciate. You know, in closing, what works best?
Be true, be honest, be respectful, you know, trust the process, right? Start with the process. I never go above everybody's head. I start with whoever's responsible, and then you work your way up. But you got to present facts, right? You can't, it can't be gray. It's got to be black and white. And I keep going back to, you got to keep your ask simple, because, you know, I look at the, like, legislation. I tell people all the time, you know, when we work on legislation, if you don't keep your ask simple, every new word you put in, every new issue, it's like an anchor, and the ship is going to start to sink because it gets complicated. Other stakeholders weigh in. If you keep it light, the wind's going to take it, it's going to go. And so I think what works really well, and a credit to our members, business partners, we build coalitions all the time with UTCA, BIA, the Builders, Utilities Association. When DEP or the legislature sees that all the businesses are united, that makes it like, okay, catches their attention. So grassroots for me is build coalitions and then keep your ask simple.
Very, very good. Tracy?
I was just going to comment that Tony's done a really, really good job about building coalitions and keeping the asks clear, straightforward, not pointing fingers. And if there's anybody on this group that belongs to other organizations that have a vested interest that haven't supported this yet, reach out to Tony, because the more the merrier.
I agree. Thank you, Tracy.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you know, I'm a big supporter of CIANJ. I think what you do at the top and how you do bring people together, and you're not, you know, it's not about CIANJ, it's about your members. It's about, you know, who you need to reach out to. And sometimes you team with organizations that may quote unquote be competitors, but it's all about the betterment of your members. So I do commend you on that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Phil. Thanks for the opportunity.
So we are at an hour and 4 minutes. I think we covered a lot, and I think it was great. I think we hit the topics we wanted to hit, Tony.
Yeah, I think so.
You know.
Yep.
Any closing questions, or anybody have anything? So I see none. So Tony, thank you very much for your time. Again, this recording will be posted on the CIANJ website probably within 48 hours, as soon as I get an opportunity to do it. And you know, we have another hot topic. It just happens to be on independent professional judgment next month. It is I don't remember the date off the top of my head. It's March 2nd. It is, the moderator is Dr. George Berkowitz, with a panel of Roger Ferguson, Neil Rivers, Andy Robbins, and Joanne Voss. So some attorneys, some LSRPs. It'll probably be a very good discussion / debate. And we'll see where we go from there.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Phil.
Thank everybody for their time. Tony, thank you very much. Everyone,
Bye-bye.
good job. Thanks. Have a
Thanks.
safe day out there, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.